As we count down one day to the APEC Leaders Meeting scheduled to start on Friday, a series of sideline summits among global leaders have been making headlines. We have details on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Thursday's edition of Press Perspective for October 30th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today, our panel of foreign correspondents join me from the historic city of Gyeongju, the venue of this year's APEC Forum. I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI live on the line. Thomas, I hear you're joining us from our temporary news studio setup in the city of Gyeongju.
Yes, Sunny, thanks for having me. I'm in your sort of tent-like studio here in beautiful Gyeongju.
Right. And Steven, I also have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia live on the line as well from the media center in the city of Gyeongju. Steven, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here with this bird's eye view of all my hardworking colleagues.
Right. Thomas, we are counting down one day to the APEC Leaders Meeting, and ahead of this multilateral gathering, there have been a number of sideline summits among global leaders there. That being said, let's begin with the summit that has been garnering quite a bit of attention well before its start. I'm talking about the meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. What has been shared about that particular summit, Thomas?
Yes, Sunny. So this has really been probably the most anticipated sideline meeting of the summit. And Xi and Trump met today in Busan. Trump was leaving, Xi was arriving, and they met in Busan for about 90 minutes or maybe 100 minutes, I guess. And it seemed that it took down the temperature anyway of what had been a sort of a boiling up trade war again. Details are still kind of sparse unless something has, just come out within the last 20 minutes or half an hour. I mean, mostly what we know of the details of their talk came from what Trump said afterwards. He was on Air Force One and had a gaggle with the reporters there and mentioned some of the details. I mean, the sort of top line things seem to be he agreed to reduce tariffs by 10%. These were sort of fentanyl-linked tariffs that he had imposed, saying that China was allowing these precursor chemicals to making fentanyl into the U.S., and he had slapped an additional 20% on tariffs on China, and then he reduced that to 10%, so that brings still the overall total on tariffs is like 47% on China. And China agreed, I guess, to try to, exert more control to stop these precursor chemicals from getting out. And China also agreed to pause the planned export controls on their rare earth minerals, which was a major concern, and a major sort of leverage point that they were using ahead of this agreement. Those are extremely valuable in every sort of application, from smartphones to missiles, and China really controls the overwhelming majority of the production and the processing of them. So Trump said that they agreed to stop these export controls, although it's just for a year. The deal is for a year, so we'll see. He said that they will renegotiate again after another year. And he said that China agreed to start buying soybeans again from U.S. farmers, which was something that they had stopped in the middle of this trade war, and that had really harmed a lot of farmers in the U.S. And those were the main takeaways. Trump said he would visit China in April, and Trump called it a great success. He said it was a 12 out of a scale of 1 to 10. And China really was more circumspect about it. They did release a readout, but it was pretty much not giving details of the agreement, but just sort of saying that it was talking about the importance of dialogue and saying that trade should sort of propel the bilateral relationship, not be a barrier. And it was not as warm, I guess I would say, as some of the other Trump bilaterals we've seen, with Lee Jae-myung and Takeichi in Japan before coming. There was no golden crown given to Trump, but at the same time, obviously I think the world is glad to see that these two superpowers talked and at least seemed to come to some basic agreements to stop, what was looking to be a really dramatic trade war. But details yet to come and a final agreement yet to come as well.
Right. Steven, Mr. Trump addressed the APEC CEO summit back on Wednesday. What was the gist of his message there?
Well, narrowing down the gist of that message is a little bit difficult because he spoke for a long time. And if you read the coverage of his speech, one descriptor that comes up a lot is wide-ranging, and that's a kind way of putting it, that Trump talked for a long time and talked about a lot of different things. A lot of his speech was about domestic U.S. issues, and a lot of it was kind of speaking quite favorably of his own actions as president and kind of depicting himself as a peacemaker and a deal maker and all the rest. He seemed to be in good spirits. I mean, he had a kind of a genial demeanor, and he was kind of seemed like he's kind of in his element at this sort of big gathering where he has a lot of opportunities to engage one-on-one with partner countries and to try to narrow out differences and try to come to agreements. And I think we saw some of that on display in his meeting with President Lee last night, where the two of them were extremely cordial in the way that they interacted, and they were very complimentary of each other, and there was a real kind of tone of celebration in their engagement, and I think some of that came out in the agreement that they reached. For President Lee's part, in his opening remarks to this gathering, he talked a lot about the importance. This is a big multilateral gathering, and he talked a lot about what he sees as the importance of engaging in these kinds of multilateral formats at a time when countries are kind of more narrowly looking out for their own interests in some cases. I mean, he used a kind of difficult to translate Korean word. I think it's a jagugusanjui, which I think a lot of our foreign media outlets rendered as protectionism, but it's not. I think that misses some of the nuance. It's more kind of like prioritizing your own interests, prioritizing what your own objectives. But I mean, just before we came on today, Sunhee, two key South Korean ministers gave a press conference here in the media center, and they talked a lot about how South Korea has, throughout its history, has benefited quite greatly by engaging in what they call the rules-based international order, in free trade, in open engagement with international partners, and how this country has a strong interest in continuing that and in seeing that institutions like APEC and an engagement in multilateral settings continues, and just a belief that when countries come together that they tend to be better off if they can put aside their own differences and work towards common goals. And I think Trump also spoke out in favor of those things too. I mean, he said this is not an exact quote, but he said something like getting together and making deals is better than fighting. And I think we've seen some deal making here so far in Gyeongju, and presumably we'll see some more.
Right. And beyond the remarks shared at the APEC CEO summit, President Lee Jae-myung also has been engaging in a series of bilateral summits following his exchange with Mr. Trump back on Wednesday, of course. With regard to his engagements on this Thursday, Thomas, could you walk us through some of them?
Yes, so he met with Canada's Prime Minister Carney today. They held a bilateral meeting, meeting, and from the readout of that, it seemed like they mainly actually focused on sort of defense and security issues, and Canada and South Korea signed a security and defense cooperation partnership, I believe yesterday, which is actually the first of its kind for Canada in the Asia Pacific. And they talked about sort of joint operations, exercises, training, deepening intelligence sharing, facilitating cooperation between NATO and Korea. So that seemed to be what they sort of emphasized as far as the discussion that they had. And I think it reflects sort of where Canada is coming from in the midst of this upheaval of the sort of global order that the Trump administration is kind of imposing on the rest of the world. I mean, even among allies, obviously there's been a lot of shifting and trying to maneuver and sort of react to Trump's tariffs, for example. And I think Canada in a lot of ways has reacted perhaps the most sharply, and maybe feels a sense of being let down or betrayed or some way by its longtime closest ally. And I think Carney has been sort of explicit about trying to pivot a bit from Canada's overwhelming sort of economic and security dependence on the U.S. And so this is part of, I think, his aim, a bit of a pivot to Asia in terms of trying to create their own paths on economic trade issues. I mean, I know Canada signed a trade deal with Indonesia last month, I believe, and so also security is falling under that umbrella. And by the same token, South Korea, I mean, obviously they did seem to have a very amiable and productive meeting between President Lee and President Trump. But I think all allies are a bit on notice to try and have alternative perhaps pathways to not be quite as reliant on the U.S., which the U.S. has made clear in terms of some of its demands on allies picking up greater defense, their share of defense budgets, et cetera. He's also got, President Lee also has upcoming bilaterals with Prime Minister Takaichi from Japan today, and I believe Prime Minister Albanese from Australia. And, obviously the Takaichi one is going to be of extreme interest. She's just newly taken the role of Prime Minister in Japan, and this is obviously a major, an incredibly important relationship. So, I think this will be a bit of a barometer for how it's going to proceed. I mean, I think there's been some concern from the South Korean side that she is more of a hawkish or a hardliner. She comes out out of the Shinzo Abe tree. She was close with him, and will that sort of impact the sort of accord that Seoul and Tokyo have achieved over the last year or 2 years? But so far it seems like she has said the right things and said that she wants to maintain the relationship that they've had, and President Lee has also expressed that. But that will certainly be one worth watching. And Australia, don't have a ton to say. I don't know too much about it, but I think also, similar to Canada in a way that Australia is trying to create its own relationships, and there's talk about stuff like supply chain, rare earths, and defense accords as well with South Korea.
Right. Steven, let's pick up where Thomas left off with regard to the summit between South Korea and Japan. What appears to be the foreign media's interest in this particular summit between these two East Asian neighbors?
Well, I can talk about my own foreign media's interest, and I would say that just basically speaking, it's the first time that Lee and Takaichi will be meeting in person, and so that's it'll be interesting to see, like, if they, and Thomas alluded to some of this, like if these two leaders will be able to maintain the quite positive momentum that's existed in the bilateral relationship since basically early 2023, which came after, as we all know, a long period of friction between the two sides. I think the bilateral relationship is in quite an interesting place just because you have these two leaders who come from the camps in their respective countries that tend to be more suspicious of the other. You have a progressive president in Lee Jae-myung who has a history of being quite stridently opposed to engagement with Japan, and then on Takaichi's side you have someone who's from their more kind of conservative nationalist camp and is more celebratory of Japan's imperial past and has a history of doing some of the things that can rankle neighbors like South Korea. But what we've observed so far, and we'll see if this continues, is both of these leaders moderating their stances and kind of putting their own personal politics or their own personal feelings aside in the name of maintaining this quite promising turn that the bilateral relationship has taken. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think one of them is that the two countries, given the recent trade tensions, given the rising security concerns in the region, are really just coming to reckon with the need for them to work together. In my reporting this week, I spoke to one analyst who attributes the changes in the bilateral relationship to both Seoul and Tokyo realizing that cooperation is no longer really an option. It's something that they really need to do. And I think the reason that politicians like Lee and Takaichi have been able to make this turn is that they are, in some ways, I think, reflecting shifts in public opinion in both of their countries. I think that, and poll data supports this, that in South Korea, views of Japan are generally quite favorable. I think a lot of South Korean people travel to Japan on tourist trips and enjoy Japanese culture. And I think a lot of them look at Japan and they do not see the imperial-minded country of the past. They see a quite forward-looking, peaceful and modern country. And I think a lot of people in Japan do the same thing. They come to South Korea on vacation. They enjoy South Korean cultural products, and they see this as a forward-looking country that it makes sense to have a forward-looking relationship with. So time will tell. But I mean, by all indications, it seems as though the two sides have come to an implicit agreement that getting along is better than having disputes over history or over anything else.
Right, cooperation being better than confrontation. Thomas, prior to her arrival here in South Korea, the Japanese Prime Minister played host to US President Donald Trump in Tokyo back on Tuesday, I believe. What were your takeaways from that summit?
Right, well, they seem to hit it off. I mean, Takeichi seems to have kind of mastered or internalized the approach that I think a lot of leaders have come to understand is the way to meet or deal with Trump, which is, he likes this kind of personal diplomacy. A lot of it is just kind of based on interpersonal, at least in terms of how they get along. And she seemed to do well with that. Trump seemed to like her. He said they were very close friends, called her a winner. And, they talked about watching the World Series. She served U.S. beef to Trump. And, she kind of knew sort of what buttons to push. I think she gave him golf-related gifts, including Shinzo Abe's putter. And, probably Trump's closest fellow leader when he was in office the first time may have been Shinzo Abe. They get along quite well, and so Takeichi is also very close to Abe. So I think they had that going for them. And they did, similar to what President Lee and Trump did. They had this big framework to discuss, and they struck a deal, but I think with still a lot of details that remain. But similar to what was going on with South Korea in terms of this large investment and how that's going to work. And in this case, Japan had agreed to a $550 billion investment in the U.S. in exchange for having tariffs lowered from 25% to 15%. And so they came to an agreement, but there's really nothing, I think, concrete yet. I'm not to say that it's easy to finalize these sorts of projects in this case, but I think there's still a lot that remains to be worked out. But we've seen names like SoftBank, Westinghouse, Toshiba, and some of the areas that they want to invest in are kind of energy related. There's some nuclear reactor factors. There's a critical mineral component. They talked about cooperating on expanding supply chains for rare earth minerals, which has become a huge factor, in the global economy these days. Takeichi said she would nominate Trump for the Nobel Prize. So, I think she played her hand well. Trump seemed to like it, and they seemed to at least get, the outlines of a deal made, as in with so many of these things. I mean, that Trump has been doing this week. There still remains a lot to see as far as the specifics of it and how it's really going to end up getting implemented. In some cases, it's sort of solving a problem that he initiated in the first place by imposing these tariffs. So, but I think he came away with it feeling like he got what he wanted, and she seemed to. This was very, very, very early in her taking the office. So I think she also seemed to play her hand well.
And staying with takeaways, Stephen, I wonder, what would you choose to highlight with regard to Wednesday's summit between President Lee Jae-myung and Mr. Trump?
I came away with the impression that Trump seems like he's one of these kind of very big personality people that the people who are around him, his tendencies and his mannerisms kind of rub off on them. So Lee's team seemed to really buy into this idea that when you're engaging with Trump diplomatically, it makes sense to be very complimentary towards him, to kind of make him the center of attention, to not, talk about your countries as collectives, as partners, but to talk about this more as an interaction between individuals. So I noticed that Lee's remarks, a lot of what he said at the outset of the meeting was really effusive praise for Trump. He described him as a peacemaker, He repeated Trump's claim that Trump has solved conflicts in 8 places around the world. And, he said that he's, under Trump's leadership, there's like a new and a great America that is emerging. And then, I was surprised to see that the nature of the deal, it was not quite what I was expecting. I thought that just given the size of the amount of money that that South Korea had agreed to invest, like it would take more kind of working level agreements, more kind of lower level bureaucratic engagement to be able to like work out the contours of how that's going to go ahead. But they quite unexpectedly, to me at least, like announced this agreement late at night, and I think it's something that both sides seem to have come away happily from. I mean, just this morning, Lee Jae-myung tweeted a very kind of a message that kind of echoed the way that Trump tends to communicate, and he said, like, we signed a beautiful, great deal with an exclamation mark, and he said, I engaged very nicely with Trump, and then Trump put out a message on Truth Social where he said, we had a great time with the great president of Korea. I think yesterday he said something like, if President Lee continues to work with me, he's going to go down as the greatest president in South Korean history. I mean, time will tell, how those remarks will age, but like just going back to what we said earlier, I mean, working together is better than having confrontation. It's good to see these guys. The people of these countries, of South Korea and the United States, I think are happy to see their leaders smiling and shaking hands and coming to agreements and expressing this determination to continue to work together. There's a very old and a very comprehensive South Korea-U.S. alliance that in recent months some analysts have kind of asked questions over the long-term durability of. They've raised questions over whether or not public opinion in South Korea may be kind of turning against the United States to some limited extent, if some of what Trump was doing was engendering some kind of resentment here. So I think just taken in isolation, what we saw yesterday was a positive episode in the history of the alliance. But we'll need some more time to see. In some cases now, like another kind of work begins where they still need to put this agreement in more detail on paper, and they still need to come up with mechanisms for enforcement and how they're specifically how they're going to make this all really come to pass. And so time will tell how that all works out.
Right. Thomas, what's really interesting is that during his summit talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, Mr. Xi Jinping actually made note of Mr. Trump's contributions to the peace brokered in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, and also between Cambodia and Thailand, which was signed in Malaysia in the presence of Mr. Trump. This all being said, Thomas, what do you suppose are the diplomatic gains for Mr. Trump, given his latest Asia trip?
Yes, you're right that she mentioned those sort of peace, related accomplishments of Trump, and although she also, hastened to add that China is also involved in working, maybe perhaps more behind the scenes on trying to, engender stability and peace in the world. But yeah, I think diplomatically, Trump probably has to look at this as a successful trip. I mean, again, just as we've repeated a few times on this program, obviously it's better to be meeting, talking to these various leaders. In his ASEAN, he was at the ASEAN summit last weekend in Malaysia, and he did, they signed, Cambodia and Thailand signed a sort of peace accord while in Trump's presence, and he's been very happy to kind of take credit for that. And he certainly made a lot of deals, I mean, with varying levels, I think, of substance to them, but it's sort of part of the whole show. I mean, he's kind of the center of attention wherever he goes, and a lot of these countries, I mean, especially some of these smaller Southeast Asian countries, it's very incumbent on them to try and maintain good relations with Trump. I mean, as it is, really for all countries in the world. I mean, the U.S. is still the most powerful country in that regard. And I think it just, so on the spectacle side of it, and perhaps, and to some extent on the diplomatic side, I think, it was probably everything Trump would have wanted. The question now is going back to the U.S. how does this really impact the country? I mean, what are the benefits of some of these deals? I mean, there's still tariffs in place on all of these countries, and a lot of economists, probably most economists, are going to say that that's not really a good thing for the U.S. or the world economy. But that's where we are. So I think he will certainly look at it as a success, and I think for partners such as South Korea, I think South Korea can say that they got probably the best they could have hoped for. And yeah, it is important to maintain try and maintain this strong alliance with the U.S. So, successes on a lot of levels, but I think really there's just still so many questions that are going to have to be answered in the weeks and months to come.
Right, and hopefully we will find out in the near future then. All right, Thomas, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And Stephen over at the Media Center in Gyeongju, thank you very much for joining us live at this hour.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective for this Thursday. See you same time tomorrow.